I've recently come to the conclusion that we do, in fact, live in a rape culture, and that's good. This is sorta gonna be my message to the people fighting against rape culture, even though they're unlikely to ever see this. So, the most important thing is what rape culture is. Across the web and in books and talking to people, you will find various definitions. And what I'm going on here is the gist. Rather than picking one definition that's been given as the correct one, I've looked for overall themes. What is rape culture generally considered to be? There are two main features. One is that people accept rape as inevitable. It's something that happens, it's something that's going to happen. Two is that rape, or the idea of rape, or things that could be seen as elements of rape, are all throughout our culture. A common example being rape jokes, or jokes that incorporate some form of sexual assault. The rough idea is that that second feature leads to the first, which allows rape, or makes people more accepting of rape happening, rather than being as disgusted or upset as they should be. In other words, rape is normalized. My understanding is that advocates against rape culture would like to see a rape joke met with the same reaction as someone saying nigger instead of the N-word would likely face in many situations. The idea is not necessarily that elements of rape culture will lead directly to rape, although for some nutcases it is, but more that we could be even less accepting of rape. So by not going as far as we can to get rid of rape culture, we aren't doing everything we can against rape. Imagine yourself in a society where any joke that even touches on anything that's like sexual assault would be considered totally unacceptable. Anything that doesn't treat rape or the idea of rape with absolute seriousness would be forbidden. Sort of in the same way that some people don't accept nigger being said in any context, even if it's to say nigger is a racial slur against black people. You have to be super careful and say the N-word, even though that means the same thing. And if you spray painted N-word on some black guy's house, the police aren't going to show up and say, well, yeah, it's vandalism, but there was clearly no racial motivation, because look how sensitive this vandal was. Getting back on track, what an anti-rape culture person would want is that same sort of contextless respect for rape. Well, not for rape. Rape is great. No, contextless respect for the idea of rape and the seriousness of rape. If we lived in a world like that, it would look like we're getting closer to accepting rape if we started accepting those rape jokes. To some people, it would look that way at least. In the same way that some people would see people who would normally say N-word starting to say nigger, even without any malice or directing it at anyone, as a shift toward racism being accepted. But for advocates against rape culture, the mainstream has already made that step. The analogy isn't perfect, because with rape culture we're not just talking about the word rape, but I hope you sort of get me, because that's how I've come to understand it. It's also how I've come to the conclusion that rape culture is a good thing. Treating the topic of rape in the way we'd need to get rid of rape culture would devastate discourse. And I think a successful crusade against rape culture might actually hurt the fight against actual rape. I mean, I'm sure you've seen situations where people seem to get away with sexual assault because they're an anti-sexual assault person. A certain allegedly pussy-grabbing film critic comes to mind. And I'm thinking, the more formal you get in ways to fight rape culture, the more clear and set out and methodical you get in, here's how you act and here's what you do to be against rape culture, the more you create a way for someone who does rape someone to defend themselves and to cover it up and to get himself covered by people who want to defend this system. Think a bit like priests who diddle kids. He couldn't have raped someone. That would undermine and belittle our rules against rape culture. He followed them perfectly. He couldn't have been a rapist. Someone make that into a short story, please. You don't even have to credit me. That's one way a rape culture can be seen as good for people who are against rape, because the cure is worse than the disease. I mean, if you also want to get rid of the part of rape culture where rape is seen as inevitable, that's another way to just put your head in the sand. You can paint that belief as acceptance, but I'd just say it's pessimism. Realistic pessimism. Now, another way in which the cure would be worse than the disease is that you would have to clamp down on people. Making light of terrible things is what people do. You can go off on some line about coping mechanisms and point to Jews making jokes during the Holocaust and blah 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 blah, but I'm just going to say it's because it works. Whether it's because there's some element of naughtiness in making light of something in a chant, perhaps, or because you've included a juxtaposition between something terrible and something nice in a joke. It creates a particular reaction in people. When something terrible is dealt with in serious drama, it can work. It can be engaging and interesting. It can be good, even, helping you think through something. Even if that does send the sign or message that that terrible thing is inevitable and it's in our culture. That's less bad than the positives are good. And it is certainly less bad than the methods that would need to be employed to stamp it out. Methods that would undoubtedly have a chilling effect on free speech, and which you would be developing instead of working against actual rape. And here's another thing. Rape culture is really good for people who want to dedicate their time and lives to fighting rape. It provides you tons and tons of springboards off which you can talk about rape. Think about how much harder it would be to get an audience to listen to you talking about rape if there was no mention of it in mainstream culture. If it wasn't in any of our jokes, if it wasn't in any of our drama, if it wasn't in our video games, if it wasn't in our books. The problem right now is that too many people aren't using those as springboards to talk about rape from, but rather trying to stab at the culture itself, at the books, at the movies, at the games, at the television, at the comedians. Rape doesn't happen because of these things. These things are made because rape exists, because sexual assault is a thing. Not only does a fight against the culture harm people directly through witch hunts and trying to restrict rights and so on, but you are wasting your energy uselessly. Yeah, if you want to fight rape culture, you'll probably make tons of progress, but none of that progress will be toward ending rape. You'll make things happen, but it's just damage. You're not actually doing any good. If you're okay with that, go ahead, but you're going to be fought. If you're not okay with that, take up the challenge of figuring out something that actually is useful. It's going to be much, much harder, and you're probably going to make much less progress, or at least seemingly less progress. Less big stuff is going to happen. But here's another trick. The people who are against you aren't for rape, right? If you figure something out where the cure isn't worse than the disease, people like me aren't going to fight you. I understand why people take the easier path, and also through looking through all these websites that people are getting their information from, I see it's kind of like a game, identifying and crushing this stuff. But it's not going to work. Not only will it not reduce rape, but it won't make people suddenly care more. This rape culture that's been described isn't numbing people to rape, any more than there's a freezing homeless people culture, numbing me to the knowledge that there are homeless people freezing right now because it's gotten colder. If you were constantly disturbed and cared about everything you probably should, you'd go insane. You would lose your marbles, you wouldn't be able to live your life. You'd suffer, the people around you would suffer, everything would collapse. And as far as I can tell, rape culture is putting a feminist lens on and looking at this thing we do with all sorts of terrible stuff, trying to tackle it with an unsuitable toolkit and diagnostic manual, incorrectly recognizing it as being an illness and trying to apply the wrong cure to the wrong symptoms in a way that will just make everyone sicker, while the real rot, the rape, continues to ruin lives untouched by your efforts. But, as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions.